Hello, I'm Bill Cork. I'm an Assistant Director of Adventist Chaplaincy Ministries for the North American Division. This is a little different video than what I've had. The others have been used a lot of PowerPoint. This one is just me. And this is a presentation that I gave in May 2019 as part of the 180 Symposium sponsored by the Center for Youth Evangelism at Andrews University. And I was looking at what are some of the social issues affecting today's youth and young adults. So my presentation was on teaching peace during multi-generational war. I'll include the link to the text so that you have the footnotes and the references available. It's been published online on my blog and on the Spectrum magazine webpage. And all the essays together are going to be part of a volume coming out that will be published by adventsource.org. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, I was heading to my monthly staff meeting with the campus ministers that I supervised. At the time, I was director of young adult and campus ministry for the Catholic Archdiocese of Galveston, Houston, a position that I had from 1998 to 2007, at which point I returned to the Adventist Church of my youth. More about that another time. Well, on my way to my staff meeting, I stopped at a Kroger on Old Spanish Trail for pick up some donuts, and it had the TV screen on with the news, and I thought that was really unusual. And I saw the Twin Towers, and they're talking about a plane crashing, and I thought back to the time that a bomber during World War II had crashed into the Empire State Building. So I thought nothing of it. And I got in the car, and they were talking about, oh, is this terrorism or was this an accident? I was kind of puzzled by that. But then on the radio, the second plane hit, and that answered the question. We were under attack, and the nation was going to be at war. We were told it would be long. I think sometimes we forget that. President Bush said to Congress on September 20th, Americans should not expect one battle, but a lengthy campaign, unlike any other we have ever seen. But we could not have known how long it would be. Babies and toddlers playing in front of the television that day and others yet unborn are now wearing the uniform and deploying to fight the war their parents had first deployed to. In the Army, it's referred to as the Long War or the Global War on Terror, and it has become our nation's first multi-generation war. What has been the cost? We've fought in 80 countries. We've spent $6 trillion. Over 3 million U.S. service members have deployed. Over 7,000 U.S. service members have died, and over 50,000 have been injured. And the toll on the nations that we've gone to has been even higher. It is estimated that 480,000 people have died from direct violence, and 21 million people have become refugees. There's no telling how many more have died from disease or starvation or any of the other secondary effects of war. My question for you to consider is this: can we teach this generation a different way? Can we plant in them the seeds of justice? The Seventh-day Adventist Church has been opposed to war since our beginning, cautioning members against volunteering and encouraging those who are drafted to serve as non-combatants. The position was most recently affirmed at the 1972 Annual Council, and I have another video about the history of the Adventist position on military service that goes into more detail on this history that I'm going to sketch out here. The 1972 statement, the first part of it quotes a 1954 statement. Genuine Christianity manifests itself in good citizenship and loyalty to civil government. The breaking out of war among men, however, in no way alters the Christian's supreme allegiance and responsibility to God, or modifies his obligation to practice his beliefs and put God first. This partnership with God through Jesus Christ, who came into this world not to destroy men's lives, but to save them, causes Seventh-day Adventists to advocate a non-combatant position. The 1954 statement said we take a non-combatant position. 1972, they changed that one word to say it. The church advocates a non-combatant position, following their divine master and not taking human life, but rendering all possible service to save it. As they accept the obligation of citizenship as well as its benefits, their loyalty to government requires them willingly to serve the state in any non-combatant capacity, civil or military, in war or peace, in uniform or out of it, which will contribute to saving life, asking only that they may serve in those capacities which do not violate their conscientious convictions. And this next section was added in 1972. It was not in the 1954 statement. This statement is not a rigid position binding church members, but gives guidance, leaving the individual member free to assess the situation for himself. Let me add, that's not a new idea. It was present in a 1934 statement as well. See that other presentation for that. On April 10th to 11th, 2019, the General Conference hosted a conference on Seventh-day Adventists and military-related service to review the church's position and to hear reports from the divisions. Speakers such as GC Health Ministries Director Peter Landless, himself a veteran of the South African military, drew attention to the need to teach Adventist children our position on war so that it will be clear in their mind when they become of age. Said Mario Ceballos, our General Conference Director of Adventist Chaplaincy Ministries, "We are not a people of war. We are a people of peace." The Seventh-day Adventist Church was organized in the middle of the U.S. Civil War. Adventists were fervent abolitionists and they supported the Union cause, but debated how they should respond to a draft. James White thought it would be madness to resist, and to do so would be taking the responsibility of suicide. But he invited other opinions, and in the issues of the Review and Herald that followed, members argued their positions. But when the church published an official statement in 1864, and they had to at that point because the exemption that had been given to anybody willing to pay a $300 commutation bounty now was going to be restricted only to members of churches that were opposed to bearing arms and fighting. Well, that's what prompted the church to finally make an official statement. And in that statement, there was no hint of divided opinion. They asked the government to regard them as one of the churches consistently opposed to military service. Quote, "While we thus cheerfully render to Caesar the things which the scriptures show to be his, we are compelled to decline all participation in acts of war and bloodshed as being inconsistent with the duties enjoined upon us by our divine master toward our enemies and toward all mankind," end quote. Some members followed their counsel, some didn't. One issue of the review mentions two who in 1865 were removed from membership for voluntary enlistment, one from the Battle Creek Church, where the church leaders were all members and there was no dissenting vote. The position of non-combatant service was reaffirmed after the war ended in 1865, again at the start of World War I and again at the start of World War II. But in 1934, this clause was added. The church does not attempt to dictate to its members individually, but each person must stand upon his own conscientious convictions. And the 1972 annual council added that similar clause that I already quoted. So today, churches which remove members for joining the military, and there are some that do, are out of compliance with the church's stated position. These statements on the role of conscience are important. They show the consistency of the church's position since the 1930s. More importantly, they underscore the approach we need to take in teaching young people. We are to give information and facilitate discussion that will help them make conscientious, informed decisions. Let's look at the reality, however. We've upheld this non-combatant position better in some times and places than in others. In World War I, some Adventists in the United Kingdom went to Dartmoor prison and given brutal and degrading punishments. In Germany, in World War I and World War II, denominational leaders followed the prevailing political winds and embraced nationalism and militarism. Those who refused to bear arms were disciplined by both church and state. In the Nazi era, some Adventists went to concentration camps or were executed. Fritz Bergner, Hans Brüning, and Willi Kohlmann were but three of the church's martyrs who were faithful to the end. In the United States, on the other hand, the Adventist Church established a program to prepare youth for non-combatant service. The Medical Cadet Corps started in the 1930s and continued through World War II, ending with the end of the draft in 1972. It taught principles of non-combatancy, life-saving skills, and military drill and ceremonies, working in collaboration with the Nebraska National Guard. It was started at Union College in Lincoln, and they wanted to be able to make sure that their students could meet what were, at the time, the military standards for medics. But after the draft ended, the church in North America dropped the ball. We have had no curriculum. Our engagements with youth as Adventist Chaplaincy Ministries have been sporadic. As former GC director of ACM, Gary Council, said, quote, "Since the cessation of the Vietnam conflict and termination of conscription in the United States in 1973, the Adventist Church benignly neglected to address the issues of military service or instruct young adult members about non-combatancy in our church journals, educational curriculums, or Sabbath schools. Medical Cadet Corps training disappeared, mostly from lack of interest. Conference leaders and church educators wrongfully assumed Adventists would not voluntarily enlist in the military services," end quote. And when the church fails to form the conscience according to Christian principles, the society will do so according to its values and passions. And after 9/11, many young men and women joined the military with their veins coursing with patriotism, including Adventists. They saw it as a just cause and a defensive war. And they've joined not just as medics like Desmond Doss or the volunteers of Operation Whitecoat. They've joined as combatants in every branch. And yes, many have also served as medics, doctors, and nurses, and as chaplains who go with love wherever our service members go. I've served as an Army chaplain, both in the Army Reserve and Vermont National Guard from 1986 to 1996. In 2009, I re-upped, as we say, in the Texas Army National Guard. In 2013, I deployed to the Middle East as part of Operation Enduring Freedom. I came home, but the war continued. I only went once, but others have had multiple deployments. One of my nephews has deployed 7 times. Another deployed 6. I think we need to do more for youth than just talk about the church's voted positions through history. We need to do more than lift up heroes and exemplars like Desmond Doss or the Whitecoats. We need to talk about war and peace in light of the tragedies and horrors of the wars in the century and a half since the founding of the church. We need to talk about the nature of war and its impact on the countries caught up in it, and the impact on the soldiers who fight it. In the nearly 18 years of the global war on terror, relatively few U.S. service members have died, a little over 7,000 at this point. But over 7,500 veterans die each and every year from suicide. That is 125,000 since 9/11 at the time that I gave this presentation initially in May 2019. 12 of those names are engraved on my own heart. Either they were casualty notifications that I had to do, or soldiers of mine who died, or members of my unit where I had to go and provide pastoral care for the survivors. 50,000 soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen have come home from deployment, wounded in body, decorated with the Purple Heart. Tens of thousands more have come home wounded in their soul, sometimes with bad paper, a dishonorable discharge that excludes them from most VA services. We have spoken of post-traumatic stress disorder since the 1980s, though stress injuries have been noted in all wars using different names, like shell shock, for instance. More recently, we've been talking about moral injury, which can occur when the sense of right and wrong has been violated, when individuals have been forced to do or see things that have gone against their conscience. War has impacted us in other ways. Our homeland has changed since 9/11. We've gone from a nation that was united in service during the days after the attack to a nation torn by fear, with politicians embracing demagoguery, scapegoating those who are different, and stirring up racist and nationalist passions long dormant. And now in the summer of 2020, we've seen that multiplied many times over. We've justified surveillance and the diminishment of civil liberties through the Patriot Act, and we've defended the torture of captured foes at Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo, and countless black sites around the world. Violence is increasing at home as well, with rising numbers of mass shootings in workplaces, houses of worship, and schools. The one that hit closest to home for me was at Santa Fe High School in Texas, about an hour from my house. A friend from the Galveston County Mental Health Agency reached out to me and asked me to assist in providing support, and I did so for 2 days. I spoke to students, teachers, and parents who, even a week later, were in shock. One student told me that his family had just moved there to get away from gang violence in the city that had taken the lives of two of his friends. I also saw students in their community coming together, encouraging one another and looking with hope to the future. What I saw in Santa Fe, I have seen around the country. Youth, young adults, and families impacted by tragedy turning their anger and their passion into action. Some student survivors, like David Hogg of Parkland, Florida, have become vocal advocates for change. Rhonda Hart, whose daughter Kimberly Vaughn was murdered at Santa Fe High School, ran for school board in a neighboring district. She left Santa Fe soon after the shooting. Phil Robertson, a 2018 Santa Fe graduate, said, "How can this happen and you still hold the same views you had before it happened? There are things we could do about this." But sadly, we have school shooting after school shooting after school shooting, and each time politicians say, well, now's not the time to talk about it. Well, the time to talk about it never comes for them. They keep putting it off, putting it off. Our teaching of peace needs to address both the horrors of war and the possibilities of peace. It needs to tap into the desire of young people to make a difference. We can start by sharing the many statements about peace that the Seventh-day Adventist Church has issued over the years. A selection can be found on the webpage of the Adventist Peace Fellowship. 2 statements were issued in opposition to the invasion of Iraq. Others condemned war in Congo and Kosovo. The Church has opposed the sale of assault weapons to civilians. It called attention to the dangers of climate change back in 1995. World leaders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church have also underscored the connection between social justice and peace. At a conference in Moscow in 1985, then General Conference President Neil C. Wilson said to Mikhail Gorbachev and other attendees, quote, "Our Christian commitment compels us to reappraise the contribution we may make to peace and the social justice intrinsic to peace. In the person of the God-man who walked among us as one of us, we see divinity and humanity combined. Thus, we cannot serve God without also serving our fellow man. Not only in his incarnation, but in his ministry to us, we see an example of how we should relate to a choice between conflict and peace." End quote. Beyond the mere reading of these historical statements, we need to find ways that young people can be involved in making a difference in the community and in the world. And we're already doing that through local service projects and mission trips, through student missions, and through internships with organizations like ADRA, the Adventist Development and Relief Agency. These are opportunities for youth to meet new people and visit new places, to serve others, to see the face of Christ in those in need, and to know that they are making a difference. You may recall the statement by Mark Twain, quote, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime." End quote. A 2013 study validated Twain's suggestion, finding, quote, "a robust relationship between the breadth of foreign travel experiences and generalized trust." One of the things I appreciated most about my 2013 deployment to the Middle East, I was in Kuwait and had a couple of trips to Qatar. And it was the opportunity to explore the country, experience the culture, and build relationships across lines of division. I participated in several soldier and leader engagements with Islamic affairs officers of the Kuwait Ministry of Defense. I invited them to give presentations to my unit ministry teams and to the soldiers of my unit on things like Islamic faith and practice and what American soldiers in Kuwait should understand about the nation and its beliefs. I took soldiers on tours of the Grand Mosque of Kuwait. We visited art and culture museums, including the Dar al-Athar al-Islamiyya. We wandered the corridors of the Souq al-Mubarakiyya, where I introduced them to an Iranian Shia rug merchant. In Doha, Qatar, we went to the Museum of Islamic Art. Everywhere we went, we were greeted warmly. Many expressed surprise, many of my soldiers did, at what they experienced, that this ran counter to everything they saw in the US media about the Middle East, regardless of the source. Young people are open to new experiences and new insights. I was a freshman at Atlantic Union College in 1980 when I found a note from the dean in my mailbox. He was assigning me a new roommate. an English as a second language student from Egypt named Abdul. We hit it off immediately. Over the next months, over many cups of tea, with the music of the Egyptian diva Kulthum playing in the background, we explored each other's scriptures and beliefs. We talked about world politics and about college life. We built a lasting friendship, and it became the basis for a lifetime of work for me in interfaith dialogue and teaching world religions. As our nations and the students in both public and Adventist schools become more diverse, more youth are exposed to these life-changing encounters. We can build intentionality into them through organizing discussions and common service. I love the model provided by the work Keith Burton did at the Center for Adventist Muslim Relations at Oakwood University, and what some of our leaders in Adventist Muslim Relations are doing in the Chattanooga area. My daughter is a student at Andrews University, participated in mission trips to Honduras and to Beirut and Jordan. She spent a year at Campus Adventiste de Sèvres, where she polished her French skills. And after graduation with majors in animal science and French, she did a year-long internship with ADRA in Madagascar. And that quote from Mark Twain is one of her favorites because she has seen the evidence in her own life and in the lives of her friends. As I explore ways to teach about war and peace, I'm reading more by Anabaptist and Quaker authors and the experiences of other conscientious objectors in our nation's wars. I spent an afternoon at Menohoff, a museum of Anabaptist history and life in Shipshewana, Indiana, just down the road about 45 minutes from Andrews University. I love some of the materials published by the American Friends Service Committee, especially their pamphlet, 10 Points to Consider Before You Sign a Military Enlistment Agreement, with suggestions like taking your time, talking to veterans about their experiences, and making sure you get every promise put into writing, and that they have someone, especially a veteran, review the contract before they sign it. I'm looking at academic programs like those at the Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary in Elkhart, Indiana. A friend of mine has taught at the Kroc Institute for the International Peace Studies at the University of Notre Dame. They host the annual Notre Dame Student Peace Conference for undergraduate and graduate students each spring. And they also have a summer institute for faculty in peace studies, which I participated in last summer. So this presentation is kind of a sketch of a work in process for me, a snapshot of a point along a journey, and I hope to be able to report back at a later date. And I invite the suggestions and contributions of anybody who's listening to this. We have a rich heritage as Adventists that we can mine in looking for ways to teach peace. We have inspiring examples of courageous individuals that we can highlight. At the same time, we need to be honest about our own failures and the negative examples of Adventist experiences in Germany during World War I and World War II, in Rwanda, where Adventist leaders were found guilty of genocide, and even in the United States. We need to study the lessons of that nationalistic fervor that gripped the church in Germany, of the tribal divisions in Rwanda, of racism and segregation in the United States and apartheid in South Africa. We need to ask how someone like Vernon Howell, known to history as David Koresh, was able to appeal to Adventist young people and get them to join him in a fiery conflagration after gun battles with law enforcement. We need to take our Adventist statement with its appeal to conscience and apply it to other areas of the spiritual formation of youth and young adults, letting them know that we are teaching them, but they need to make decisions according to their conscience. In making this call for a teaching of peace, I'm echoing an invitation others have made from time to time. The 2002 General Conference statement, A Call for Peace, made this same plea. It said, "The Seventh-day Adventist Church operates what may be the second largest worldwide parochial school system. Each of its more than 6,000 schools, colleges, and universities is being asked to set aside 1 week each school year to emphasize and highlight through various programs respect, cultural awareness, nonviolence, peacemaking, conflict resolution, and reconciliation as a way of making a specifically Adventist contribution to a culture of social harmony and peace. With this in mind, the church's education department is preparing curricula and other materials to help in implementing this peace program. It goes on. Education of the church member in the pew for nonviolence, peace, and reconciliation needs to be an ongoing process. Pastors are being asked to use their pulpits to proclaim the gospel of peace, forgiveness, and reconciliation, which dissolves barriers created by race, ethnicity, nationality, gender, and religion, and promotes peaceful human relations between individuals, groups, and nations. End quote. I haven't seen any evidence that that 2002 statement brought about the intent that it described there. I've written to several people who served in the GC Education Department as to whether that peace program was ever produced. It looks like the recommendation was ignored, except for a couple of special issues of the Journal of Adventist Education in 2003 and 2008. So that call is still out there. It is still up to us now to make it happen. So much has happened since 2002. Nearly 20 years of war, increasing racial division, increasing cries for justice. So much fear and division have darkened our land and gripped even some of our own members. Youth and young adults are ready to let their light shine. Let us help them kindle that flame. Thank you.